What if every Avengers team in history received the same warning at the exact same moment, and every single one of them was told that if they failed to unite, Earth would not survive the night? At first, Steve Rogers thought it was a trick. Thor thought it was prophecy. Tony Stark thought it was impossible. And somewhere beyond the edge of reality, something was already laughing. The sky above New York suddenly turned black. Not storm clouds, not an alien invasion. Blackness, as if someone had reached across the universe and switched off the stars. Every satellite on Earth went dead. Every communication network collapsed. Every mystical barrier on the planet began to fracture. In the Sanctum Sanctorum, Doctor Strange watched dozens of realities disappear from a glowing map of the multiverse. One by one, gone. Then his eyes widened, because the final red point wasn't disappearing. It was moving, straight toward Earth. Strange. Wong whispered, "What is that?" Strange didn't answer. He was staring at something even more terrifying. A message had appeared across the eye of Agamotto. "There is no Avengers team strong enough." Then another line appeared. "Therefore, bring them all." Across the world, heroes felt it. Sam Wilson dropped his shield. Carol Danvers stopped in midair. Bruce Banner looked toward the stars. Scott Lang suddenly stopped joking. Peter Parker felt every hair on his body rise. And in a place that should have been impossible, Natasha Romanoff opened her eyes. She had been dead, but now she was standing in darkness. And someone was standing across from her. A man wearing no armor, no crown, no weapon, only a smile. "You've spent years asking what would happen if the Avengers stood together," he said. Natasha stared at him. "Who are you?" The stranger smiled wider. "I'm the reason they never have." Then he raised one hand. And somewhere in the living universe, every Avengers tower, every hidden headquarters, every abandoned Quinjet, every ancient weapon, and every surviving hero received the same message. Assemble, not for Earth, not for humanity, for existence itself. Because this time, the Avengers weren't facing Ultron. They weren't facing Thanos. They weren't facing Kong. Those enemies had wanted to conquer reality. This enemy wanted something far worse. He wanted to erase the idea that reality had ever existed, and if the Avengers failed, there would be nothing left to remember them. For years, the word Avengers had meant different things to different generations. To Steve Rogers, it meant sacrifice. To Tony Stark, it meant responsibility. To Thor, it meant warriors standing together against impossible odds. To Natasha, it meant people who had become family despite everything that should have kept them apart. But the Avengers had never truly been one team. They had fractured, rebuilt, fallen, returned. New heroes had inherited the name while carrying the ghosts of those who came before them. The original Avengers, the new Avengers, the young Avengers, the West Coast Avengers, the secret Avengers, the mighty Avengers, the uncanny Avengers. Teams born from different eras, different ideologies, different tragedies. And now every one of them was being called home. The first response came from a familiar place, a quiet farm. Sam Wilson stood outside beneath the night sky, holding the shield that Steve Rogers had once carried. He watched the darkness spreading across the horizon. "You seeing this?" he asked. A voice answered through his communicator. "Unfortunately." Sam smiled faintly. "Clint, yeah. You still got the arrows?" A pause. "Sam, I have enough arrows to make a point." Sam shook his head. That's the most Clint Barton answer possible. But then another voice interrupted. "Guys!" Sam looked down. Peter Parker's voice. Young, nervous, trying very hard not to sound afraid. "What exactly is happening?" Sam's expression changed. "We don't know." Peter swallowed. "That's not very comforting." "It wasn't supposed to be." Then the ground trembled. A massive shadow passed across the moon. Peter looked upward. Guys?" "What?" "I think we have company." The clouds split apart. Something enormous descended from the darkness. Not a ship, not a creature, a fortress. It was larger than Manhattan, built from pieces of shattered worlds, ancient celestial machinery, broken Kree technology, and fragments of places that no longer existed. and carved across its surface was a symbol none of them recognized, a circle surrounded by 8 broken lines. Doctor Strange saw the symbol at the same moment. So did Thor. So did Carol. So did Bruce Banner. And for the first time in centuries, even the oldest cosmic beings noticed it. The living tribunal turned. The Watchers stopped observing. The remaining Celestials looked toward Earth. Something had entered the universe that even they had not predicted. Strange stepped forward inside the sanctum. Everyone thinks this is an invasion. Wong looked at him. What else could it be? Strange stared into the dimensional window. No. His voice became quieter. It's a summons. And then the doors of the sanctum opened. Steve Rogers walked inside. Older, scarred, carrying no shield. Behind him came Sam Wilson. Then Thor, Carol Danvers, Bruce Banner, Peter Parker, Clint Barton, Scott Lang, Hope Van Dyne, Shang-Chi. Captain Marvel's energy illuminated the room. Thor's lightning crackled against the walls. Hulk's footsteps shook the floor. But Strange wasn't looking at them. He was looking behind them. More heroes were arriving. Wakandan aircraft ascended through the clouds. Black Panther stepped out. Shuri followed. The Guardians of the Galaxy appeared through a damaged portal. The X-Men arrived through another. Deadpool walked through last. He looked around. Okay, he said. Either we're saving the universe, or this is the worst group therapy session ever. Nobody laughed. Deadpool slowly lowered his hands. Wow. Tough crowd. Steve looked around the room. Heroes who had once fought beside each other. Heroes who had fought against each other. Heroes who had never met. Heroes who had lost people to wars none of them wanted to remember. He finally spoke. We spent too long thinking about which Avengers team was the best. His eyes moved from one face to another. Tonight, that doesn't matter. Thor stepped forward. What enemy commands such a gathering? Steve looked toward Strange. Strange didn't answer immediately, because he could feel something approaching. Something vast. Something ancient. Then every light in the sanctum went out. A voice echoed through the darkness. You have misunderstood. The heroes turned. The voice wasn't coming from the walls. It wasn't coming from the sky. It was coming from inside their minds. You believe I summoned you because I fear you. A pause. You believe I brought every Avengers team together because I cannot defeat them individually. The darkness became colder. That is not why. A single image appeared in the air. Earth, then another. The moon, then another. An entire galaxy. And then the image zoomed outward. Hundreds of galaxies. Thousands. Millions. All connected by thin glowing lines. One by one, those lines began turning black. Strange stepped forward. What are you doing? The voice answered. Nothing. The image froze. I am simply removing what was never supposed to exist. Tony Stark suddenly appeared on the screen. Not physically. A recording. His face. His voice. A message created before his death. If you're seeing this... The room became silent. Peter's eyes widened. Steve stared at the screen. Tony continued. Then something went wrong. Peter whispered, Mr. Stark? Tony's holographic face looked tired. I spent my entire life believing the biggest threat was something coming from outside. An army. An alien. A god. A machine. He paused. I was wrong. The recording distorted. There's something underneath the universe. The heroes stared. Something that has been watching every war we fought. Every time we saved the world. Every time we rebuilt it. Tony looked directly toward the camera. And it's been learning. The message suddenly cut to static. Then Tony's final words emerged through the interference. If it ever wakes up, his expression became serious. Don't fight it separately. The recording disappeared. Steve looked around. Where's the rest of the message? Strange's eyes narrowed. There isn't one. Thor gripped Stormbreaker. Then we find the creature. Carol's eyes burned with cosmic energy. And we kill it. Strange shook his head. No. Carol looked at him. Why not? Because Tony didn't say we needed to kill it. Strange turned toward the dark window. He said we needed to fight together. The entire building shook. Outside, the enormous fortress moved closer. Then every screen in the sanctum activated at once. A face appeared. The same stranger Natasha had seen. Calm, almost human, he looked at the Avengers and smiled. You finally came. Steve stepped forward. Who are you? The stranger's eyes moved across the room. Your enemy. Thor raised his weapon. Name yourself. The stranger smiled. You've given my kind many names. He looked toward Strange. God. Then toward Thor. Monster. Then toward Banner. Abomination. Then toward Carol. Cosmic anomaly. Finally, his eyes stopped on Steve. Enemy. Steve tightened his fists. And what's your name? The stranger's smile vanished. I am the last memory. The room went silent. The final consciousness that survives when everything else is gone. He lifted his hand. And tonight, behind him, countless dead universes appeared. I have come to make sure there are no memories left to preserve. The screen shattered. At that exact moment, something struck Earth. The shockwave traveled across continents. Oceans rose. Buildings trembled. Portals opened spontaneously. And from those portals came armies. Not aliens. Not monsters. Versions of heroes. Corrupted versions. Avengers who had lost. Avengers who had become tyrants. Avengers who had died. Armies of broken possibilities. Steve looked at the impossible army gathering outside. Then he slowly reached for a shield. Not his own. Another shield. One left behind decades ago. He lifted it. Sam stood beside him. Thor stepped forward. Carol ignited. Banner's breathing changed. Peter pulled his mask over his face. Strange raised both hands. And behind them, heroes from every generation began taking their positions. For the first time in history, every Avenger's legacy stood beneath one banner. But nobody noticed the most terrifying detail. The enemy wasn't attacking. It was waiting. Because the last memory didn't want to defeat the Avengers one by one. It wanted them to unite. It wanted them to become stronger. It wanted them to become one perfect target. And somewhere beneath the battlefield, beneath the planet, beneath reality itself, something opened its eyes. Strange suddenly froze. He heard a whisper, not from the enemy, from the universe. Stephen. He turned. What? Nobody had spoken. Then the whisper came again. Don't assemble. Strange's face went pale, because he finally understood. The war wasn't beginning because the Avengers had united. The war was beginning because the Avengers had done exactly what their enemy wanted. And above them, the last memory smiled. At last. The stars went dark. Now! His voice echoed across every universe. Let the greatest Avengers war in history begin. What if the greatest mistake the Avengers could make was not fighting their enemy, but giving him exactly what he wanted by standing together? The first explosion came from the sky. The second came from beneath Manhattan. The third came from somewhere no human being could see. And then the entire planet screamed. For one impossible second, every Avengers team in existence stood frozen. Steve Rogers stared at the army approaching through the darkness. Sam Wilson spread his wings. Thor raised Stormbreaker. Captain Marvel surrounded herself with cosmic energy. Hulk growled. Spider-Man clung to the side of a damaged building. Doctor Strange looked toward the sky. And for the first time in his life, Strange wished he had never learned the truth, because the last memory wasn't an invading army. It wasn't a god. It wasn't even a being in the traditional sense. It was an idea that had somehow learned how to think. An idea born from every universe that had ever died, every forgotten civilization, every hero whose name had vanished from history, every timeline erased before anyone could remember it. The last memory was everything reality had failed to preserve, and now it had decided to make sure nothing remained. Strange looked at Steve. We need to break formation. Steve frowned. What? Now? Steve stared at him. You said we needed everyone. I was wrong. Thor stepped between them. You believe this creature cannot be defeated by our combined strength? Strange shook his head. No. He looked toward the sky. I believe that's exactly what it wants. Before anyone could respond, The enemy army descended. The first wave struck Manhattan. A corrupted Iron Man tore through a building. A twisted Captain America crashed through the street. A Hulk with black veins across his body roared beneath the moon. Spider-Man watched one of the alternate heroes leap toward him. The movement was familiar, too familiar. The enemy Spider-Man landed on a rooftop. His mask was torn. His eyes glowed white. Peter stared. "Okay." The corrupted Spider-Man tilted his head. Peter swallowed. "That's creepy." The other Spider-Man spoke. "You always talk when you're afraid." Peter's expression changed. "How do you know that?" The creature smiled. "Because I remember every version of you." Then it attacked. Peter barely dodged the first strike. The impact shattered the roof beneath him. Peter swung away. The enemy followed. Every movement was familiar. Every maneuver. Every weakness. Peter realized what was happening. It wasn't fighting him. It was predicting him. "Strange," Peter shouted. Strange looked up. "What?" "It knows us." Strange's eyes widened. Every hero began realizing the same thing. Thor's opponent knew every combat technique he had ever used. Carol's enemy knew the limits of her energy absorption. Hulk's enemy knew exactly how to provoke Banner. Clint's opponent predicted every arrow. Even Steve's enemy knew how he would move before he moved. The last memory had studied them through every possible timeline. It didn't merely know who they were. It knew who they could become. Steve blocked a punch. The enemy Captain America smiled. "You always lead from the front." Steve pushed him backward. "Somebody has to. That's why they die." Steve froze. The corrupted Captain America whispered, "Everyone who follows you eventually dies." Steve's jaw tightened. "Not tonight." He struck. The enemy went flying. But instead of falling, it dissolved into black smoke. Steve stared. "Where did he go?" Strange answered from behind him. "He's not real." Steve turned. "What?" "Not completely." Strange raised his hands. "Their memories given bodies." Sam landed beside them. "Then we destroy the memories." Strange looked at him. "Can you destroy a memory?" Sam hesitated. "No." "Exactly." A massive explosion shook the city. Thor flew through the smoke and slammed into the ground. Carol caught him before he hit a building. Thor stood. "I'm beginning to dislike this enemy." Carol smiled. "You're just realizing that?" Thor looked toward the sky. "I have fought gods, titans, armies, and beings older than my realm." He raised Stormbreaker. "But never an enemy who knows the ending before the battle begins." Carol looked at him. "Then let's change the ending." The two launched into the sky. Together, lightning and cosmic energy collided with the enemy fortress. The fortress barely moved. Thor's lightning spread across its surface. Carol fired a beam powerful enough to split a moon. Nothing. The last memory's voice echoed through space. Power. The fortress absorbed the attack. Always your first answer. Carol's eyes narrowed. "Then what's your answer?" "Time." Suddenly Carol saw herself. Not one version. Thousands. Every possible Carol Danvers. Warrior. Queen. Martyr. Villain. Savior. Dead. Alive. Alone. She screamed as every version appeared simultaneously. Thor saw his own possibilities. King Thor. Old Thor. Broken Thor. Thor who never found Mjolnir. Thor who became worthy too late. Thor who survived Ragnarok. Thor who caused it. Thor grabbed his head. "No!" Carol reached for him. "Thor!" A black tendril wrapped around her arm. Then another around her throat. She fired energy. It didn't work. The last memory whispered, "You cannot defeat what already remembers you losing." Thor's eyes flashed. He looked at Carol. "Then we shall give a memory it cannot understand." He raised Stormbreaker. Carol understood immediately. They stopped fighting the army. They stopped attacking the fortress. Instead, Thor called every bolt of lightning toward himself. Carol absorbed the energy. The entire sky became white. For a moment, even the last memory stopped speaking. Then Thor screamed. Carol released everything. The explosion tore through the battlefield. Thousands of memory creatures vanished. The corrupted heroes disappeared. The fortress shook, and across the world, the Avengers saw the enemy army retreat. Peter landed beside Sam. Did we win? Sam looked at the sky. No. Peter sighed. I knew it. Strange suddenly appeared. Everyone, the heroes turned. Strange looked terrified. That attack didn't hurt it. Steve frowned. Then what did it do? Strange looked toward the battlefield. It fed it. Silence. What? Strange pointed toward the sky. The last memory was changing. The energy Thor and Carol had unleashed was flowing into the fortress. Absorbed, stored, studied. The enemy had wanted them to attack. It had wanted them to use their strongest abilities. Every attack was data. Every strategy was information. Every sacrifice was another lesson. The last memory had learned how the Avengers fought together, and now it knew something else. How they loved, how they trusted, how they sacrificed, how they reacted when someone was hurt. The enemy had discovered their greatest strength, and therefore their greatest weakness. The last memory appeared above Earth, not as a projection this time, as a massive human-shaped figure made from stars and darkness. I understand now. The voice was almost gentle. You do not fight because you are powerful. The figure looked down. You fight because you care. Steve stepped forward. And that's something you'll never understand. The last memory smiled. Incorrect. The sky changed. Steve saw Bucky, alive, then Peggy, then Tony, then Natasha, then everyone he had lost. Sam saw Steve. Thor saw Loki. Peter saw Aunt May. Banner saw Betty. Clint saw Natasha. Carol saw Maria. Every hero saw someone they had lost, someone they loved, someone they would give anything to see again. The battlefield became silent. Peter's eyes filled with tears. Aunt May? The figure spoke. I can return them. Peter stared. What? I can return everyone you lost. Strange stepped forward. Don't listen. The last memory continued. Every death. A vision of Tony appeared beside Peter. Every sacrifice. Natasha appeared beside Clint. Every goodbye. Loki appeared beside Thor. Every regret. You spend your lives fighting death. The figure extended its hand. I offer you a universe without it. Thor stared at Loki. Loki smiled. You always were sentimental. Thor's eyes filled with tears. Brother? Loki looked toward him. Don't. The image began fading. Thor reached out. Loki! The vision vanished. The last memory laughed softly. See? Peter clenched his fists. You don't get to do that. The figure turned toward him. I already have. Peter's spider sense exploded. He looked behind him. A black portal opened. Something stepped through. Peter froze. Tony Stark. Not a memory. Not a projection. Not a corrupted version. Tony. Armor damaged. Blood on his face. Eyes alive. Peter's voice broke. Mr. Stark? Tony looked at him. Hey, kid. Peter couldn't move. Steve stared in disbelief. Tony. Tony smiled. Miss me? Thor looked toward Strange. Is he real? Strange didn't answer, because he couldn't tell. And that terrified him more than anything. Tony walked toward the Avengers. I've been waiting. Peter ran forward. Tony opened his arms. Peter hugged him. For the first time in years, Peter felt safe. Then Tony whispered into his ear, Don't trust me. Peter froze. What? Tony's expression changed. His eyes became completely black. The armor beneath his body cracked, and the last memory's voice emerged through Tony's mouth. Because now, the battlefield shook. I know exactly how to break you. Tony raised his hand. A beam of energy erupted from his palm. Peter was thrown across the battlefield. Steve raised his shield. Sam rushed forward. Thor summoned lightning. Carol launched herself into the air. Every Avengers team moved at once. But the last memory had already achieved its objective. The Avengers weren't fighting an army anymore. They were fighting their own memories. And somewhere beneath the earth, something enormous began waking up. Strange suddenly felt it. He looked downward. No. Wong turned. What is it? Strange's face went pale. The thing beneath reality. What about it? Strange whispered the words no Avenger wanted to hear. It's not the last memory. A deep vibration passed through the planet. Then what is it? Strange looked toward the battlefield. It's what the last memory has been hiding from us. The ground split. A colossal eye opened beneath Manhattan. An entire planet went silent, because the eye was not looking at the Avengers. It was looking at the last memory. The last memory turned. For the first time, it looked afraid, and then the thing beneath reality spoke. Child. The last memory stepped backward. The ancient voice continued. You have awakened me too soon. The Avengers stared upward. Steve tightened his grip on the shield. Thor raised Stormbreaker. Strange whispered, What are we awakened? The answer came from beneath the world. War. The planet cracked. And every Avengers team realized a horrifying truth. The enemy they had gathered to defeat might only have been running from something even worse. What if the enemy that united every Avengers team was never the true threat? And the being beneath Earth had been waiting for the Avengers to become powerful enough to awaken it? For 3 seconds, nobody moved. The battlefield had gone completely silent. No explosions, no screaming, no thunder. Even the wind seemed afraid to cross the broken streets of Manhattan. Then the ground opened wider. Buildings collapsed into darkness. Entire sections of the city disappeared beneath an expanding fissure. And from somewhere beneath the planet came a sound so deep that the Avengers didn't hear it with their ears. They felt it in their bones. Peter Parker dropped to one knee. Please tell me everyone else felt that. Sam looked around. Yeah. Peter swallowed. Great. Thor stared into the abyss. I know many ancient powers. Doctor Strange stepped beside him. This isn't one of them. Thor looked at him. Then what is it? Strange's eyes remained fixed on the darkness. I don't know. Thor's expression hardened. You always know. Not this time. That answer frightened Thor more than the creature itself. Because Stephen Strange had faced Dormammu. He had stood against Thanos. He had watched universes collapse. He had looked into dimensions where time and death had no meaning. But whatever was beneath Earth, Strange couldn't see its future. He couldn't see its past. He couldn't even see its beginning. It existed outside the rules he understood. Then the last memory moved. For the first time since appearing, it wasn't smiling. Its massive cosmic form began shrinking. The voice beneath the earth spoke again. Come home. The last memory shook its head. No. The voice became louder. Come home. The sky cracked. The last memory screamed. Darkness erupted from its body. Thousands of memories burst outward like burning stars. Every universe it had consumed. Every civilization. Every hero. Every forgotten moment. All of them were released at once. The Avengers were blinded. Steve saw himself as a child. Sam saw himself flying over Harlem. Thor saw Asgard before its destruction. Bruce saw himself before the Hulk. Peter saw Uncle Ben. Clint saw his family. Wanda saw her brother. Carol saw the first moment she touched cosmic power. Shang-Chi saw his father. Black Panther saw Wakanda. And among all those memories, Tony Stark appeared again. But this time he wasn't smiling. He looked directly at Steve. Steve. Steve stepped forward. Tony. Tony shook his head. Don't let it divide you. Steve stared. What does that mean? Tony looked toward the sky. It isn't trying to kill you. Steve's expression hardened. Then what is it doing? Tony answered with one sentence. Trying to make you choose. Then he vanished. Steve turned toward Strange. Choose what? Strange didn't answer, because he already knew the last memory wasn't creating an army. It was creating a decision, a choice that would determine which universes survived. The abyss beneath Earth expanded, and suddenly, every Avengers communicator activated. A voice came through. Not the last memory. Not the ancient creature. Natasha. Steve. Steve froze. The voice came again. Steve, if you're hearing this, you're already too late. Clint's face went white. Natasha? The others turned toward him. Clint stepped closer to the communicator. Nat. Static. Then her voice returned. You can't beat it. Clint's breathing stopped. Where are you? Silence. Natasha. The communicator crackled. Not where you think. Then the transmission ended. Clint stared at the device. Thor placed a hand on his shoulder. She may yet live. Clint looked at him. You don't understand. Thor frowned. I have lost people too. Clint shook his head. No. His voice trembled. That wasn't Natasha. Everyone looked toward Strange. He was already examining the device. After several seconds, he lowered his hands. He's right. Clint looked at him. What? Strange looked toward the abyss. That wasn't Natasha's voice. Steve asked, Then whose was it? Strange whispered, The universe. Suddenly, dozens of portals opened. Avengers from alternate realities emerged. Some wore armor. Some carried ancient weapons. Some were barely recognizable. One stepped through wearing a black Iron Man suit. Another carried Thor's hammer. Another wore the Captain America shield. A woman in a torn Avengers uniform walked through next. Sam stared. Who are these people? Strange looked at them. Survivors. Steve approached the nearest one. Survivors of what? The alternate Captain America stared at him. Your future. Steve's face tightened. What happened? The stranger looked behind him. Everything. He pointed toward the sky. You think the war is beginning? He shook his head. The war already happened. Sam stepped forward. When? The alternate hero looked directly at Steve. In every universe. Silence. Peter whispered. Then why are we still here? The stranger looked at him. Because this is the one universe where the Avengers haven't made the final choice. Steve felt a chill. What choice? The alternate Captain America looked at every Avenger. You have to decide which reality survives. Nobody spoke. Thor stepped forward. That is impossible. No. The survivor's voice cracked. It's inevitable. Carol floated closer. What happens to the others? The stranger hesitated. They die. Peter stared. All of them. The survivor nodded. Every universe except one. Peter looked toward Steve. That's not saving reality. Steve didn't answer. Because he knew. It wasn't. It was choosing who deserved to exist. And that was something the Avengers had never been willing to do. The last memory appeared again. But now its form was damaged. Pieces of its cosmic body were missing. It looked almost human. Almost vulnerable. It looked at Steve. You see now. Steve stared at it. You've been manipulating us. Yes. Why? The last memory looked toward the abyss. Because I have seen what happens when you refuse to choose. Steve frowned. What happens? The last memory answered. Everything dies. The ancient creature beneath Earth began to rise. The planet shook violently. The ocean pulled away from the coastlines. Mountains cracked. In Wakanda, Shuri watched the horizon split. In New Asgard, Valkyrie raised her sword. Across the planet, civilians looked toward the sky. And then the creature emerged. Not completely. Only its hand. One enormous hand rose from the abyss and wrapped around the edge of Manhattan. Its fingers were larger than skyscrapers. Thor flew upward. By the gods! Hulk stared. Even Banner whispered. That's big. Deadpool looked up. That's what she said. Everyone turned toward him. Deadpool raised both hands. Sorry. Thor attacked first. Lightning struck the creature's hand. The result was nothing. Thor's eyes widened. He attacked again. Nothing. Hulk jumped. He landed on the creature's fingers and punched with everything he had. The impact echoed across the city. The creature didn't move. Hulk roared. The hand simply closed. Hulk disappeared inside its grip. Bruce, She-Hulk, launched herself toward him. Carol followed. Thor attacked from above. Sam and Peter pulled civilians away. Strange created enormous magical barriers. Every Avengers team moved simultaneously. For the first time, their greatest strength wasn't being used against an army. It was being used to rescue one person. Hulk! The creature slowly raised its hand. Then something happened. The Hulk's eyes changed. Not green, not red, white. The creature suddenly released him. Hulk fell. Thor caught him. Banner emerged unconscious. Strange stared at the creature. It reacted. Sam looked at him. To what? Strange pointed toward Hulk. Fear. Everyone went silent. The creature could feel fear. And worse, it was feeding on it. The more frightened humanity became, the stronger became. Steve looked toward the city. Millions of civilians were watching. If panic spread, the creature would become unstoppable. Steve immediately understood. Nobody tells him what this thing is. Sam looked at him. Steve, people can see it. I know. So, what do we do? Steve looked around at the Avengers. We give them something else to see. Sam understood. Hope. The Avengers moved. Black Panther's forces protected civilians. Spider-Man rescued trapped families. Ant-Man expanded to hold collapsing structures. Wasp stabilized bridges. Doctor Strange sealed dimensional fractures. Captain Marvel flew across the atmosphere, stopping debris from reaching cities. Thor carried entire sections of buildings away from civilians. The X-Men created psychic barriers. The Guardians evacuated orbital stations. For the first time, the world didn't see heroes fighting. It saw heroes saving. The creature began weakening. The last memory watched. And for the first time, it smiled. Steve noticed. Why are you smiling? The last memory looked at him. Because now I understand why you were chosen. Steve frowned. Chosen for what? The last memory pointed toward him. You. The battlefield became silent. Sam looked at Steve. What does that mean? The last memory answered. The universe didn't summon every Avengers team because they were the strongest. Its eyes glowed. It summoned them because every team needs a leader. Steve tightened his grip. And you are the only one who can make the final decision. Steve's expression changed. What decision? The last memory looked toward the abyss. Which universe lives? Steve stared. No, you haven't even heard the options. I don't care. The last memory moved closer. If you refuse, every universe dies. Steve shook his head. There has to be another way. The last memory smiled. There always is. Strange stepped forward. What? The last memory looked at him. The Avengers. Strange's eyes narrowed. What do you mean? The last memory answered. You have spent your entire existence believing your greatest weapon was power. It looked toward the assembled heroes. You were wrong. Steve stared. Then what is it? The last memory pointed toward the Avengers. Choice. Suddenly, every hero's communicator activated. A countdown appeared. 10 hours. 10 hours. Peter looked at Steve. What happens when it reaches 0? The last memory vanished. Its final words echoed across the world. Then every universe dies. The countdown began. 9 hours, 59 minutes, and 59 seconds. Steve stared at the numbers. Sam stood beside him. What do we do? Steve looked at the thousands of heroes around him. Then he looked toward the wounded, the frightened, the exhausted, the heroes who had lost everything. He finally answered, We find another way. Strange nodded. But where do we start? Steve looked toward the abyss. We start with the enemy. The last memory had disappeared, but something remained behind. A single black shard floating in the air. Strange approached it. The shard whispered, Steve Rogers. Steve stepped forward. Who are you? The shard answered, I am the memory of the first universe that died. Steve looked at Strange. The shard continued, and I know how to kill the thing beneath your world. Everyone went silent. Thor stepped closer. Tell us. The shard began glowing. There is one weapon. Strange asked, What weapon? The shard answered, The Avengers. Steve frowned. That doesn't make sense. The shard pulsed. Not the team. A pause. All of you. Then the shard showed them something. A battlefield beyond time. Millions of Avengers. Every version. Every generation. Every hero. Standing together. And in front of them, the ancient creature. But the image revealed one horrifying detail. The Avengers weren't attacking. They were kneeling. Steve stared. What happened? The shard whispered. They lost. The countdown continued. 9 hours, 42 minutes, and 11 seconds. Steve looked around. Every team was waiting. Every hero was watching him. For the first time in his life, Steve Rogers felt the weight of every Avengers symbol ever created. And then he realized something terrifying. The universe wasn't asking him to lead the Avengers. It was asking him to decide whether the Avengers deserved to survive. Steve looked at Sam. Sam looked back. You don't have to do this alone. Steve nodded. I know. Thor stepped forward. Neither do you. Carol joined them. None of us do. Peter stepped beside Steve. That's kind of the whole point, right? Steve looked at the young hero. Then he smiled. Yeah. He raised a shield. That's the whole point. Across the battlefield, every Avengers team raised their weapons. The countdown continued. And beneath the planet, the ancient creature opened its second eye. This time, it wasn't looking at Earth. It was looking directly at Steve Rogers. Then it spoke. Captain. Steve froze. The creature's voice echoed through every universe. Show me what your Avengers are willing to sacrifice. And the countdown suddenly changed. 9 hours, then began falling twice as fast. The greatest war in Marvel had finally begun, and this time, the Avengers weren't fighting to save the world. They were fighting to prove that the world deserved to exist. What if the Avengers discovered that the only way to defeat the creature beneath reality was to sacrifice the one thing that had made them heroes? Their ability to remember the people they loved? The countdown was falling, not ticking, falling. 9 hours. 8 hours, 59 minutes, and 59 seconds. 8 hours, 59 minutes, and 58 seconds. And somewhere beneath reality, the ancient creature watched. It had 2 eyes now, 2 enormous eyes beneath the cracked surface of existence itself. Every Avengers team stood together. But for the first time, unity didn't feel like strength. It felt like a burden. Steve Rogers looked around at them. The original Avengers, the new Avengers, the young Avengers, the secret Avengers, the mighty Avengers, the uncanny Avengers, heroes from universes that should never have touched, heroes who had died, heroes who had returned, heroes who had never even met, and all of them were waiting for one answer. How do you fight something that can feed on fear, manipulate memory, and exist outside time? Dr. Strange finally spoke. We don't. Everyone looked at him. Steve frowned. What? Strange pointed toward the creature. We don't fight it. Thor tightened his grip on Stormbreaker. Then what do we do? Strange looked at the black shard floating before him. We starve it. The shard pulsed. A voice emerged. Correct. Strange turned. The shard continued. The creature consumes emotional energy. Fear is its favorite. Carol crossed her arms. Then we stopped being afraid. Strange shook his head. That's impossible. Peter looked confused. Why? Because fear isn't weakness. Strange looked at the heroes. Fear is information. Every living creature experiences it. Steve nodded slowly. So, how do we starve something that feeds on something every living being has? The shard answered. You give it something it cannot consume. Silence. What? Acceptance. The word seemed almost meaningless. But Strange understood. If the creature fed on fear of loss, then the Avengers had to stop fearing loss. Not because they didn't care, but because they accepted that love could survive even when people were gone. Peter looked toward the shard. How? The shard showed them a vision, a battlefield, an Avengers team standing together. Then one hero disappeared. Another vanished. Another, until only one remained. The final Avenger lowered his weapon, not in defeat, in peace. Steve stared. What is this? The shard answered. The only victory I have ever witnessed. Steve shook his head. Someone had to die. Everyone did. Peter looked horrified. Then that's not victory. The shard pulsed. You misunderstand. The vision changed. The heroes disappeared. But their memories remained. Their sacrifices, their courage, their choices, their love, the universe carried them forward. The shard whispered. They died. The vision became brighter, but they were not erased. Strange's eyes widened. That's the difference. Steve looked at him. What? Strange turned toward the heroes. The creature isn't afraid of death. He looked toward the abyss. It's afraid of being forgotten. The ancient creature suddenly roared. The sound shattered windows across the planet. The black shard cracked. The countdown accelerated. 8 hours, 17 minutes, and 32 seconds. Strange shouted, "We found its weakness." The heroes prepared themselves. Steve asked, "How do we use it?" Strange looked at him. "We don't destroy its memories. We replace them." The plan sounded impossible, because to defeat the last memory, they would have to enter the creature's consciousness. And to enter its consciousness, they would have to let it enter theirs. Steve stared at Strange. "How many people?" "Everyone." The room went silent. Thor stepped forward. "Every Avenger?" Strange nodded. "Every hero." Carol looked toward the battlefield. "And if it takes control?" Strange didn't answer. Steve did. "Then we trust each other." Sam looked at him. Steve smiled. "You want to know what happens when every Avengers team stands together?" He raised his shield. "Now we find out." The heroes formed a circle. Strange stood in the center. Wanda stepped forward. Then Jean Grey. Then Loki. Then Doctor Strange. Telepaths. Sorcerers. Cosmic beings. Reality manipulators. They combined their powers. The sky opened. Millions of memories appeared. Every Avengers battle. Every victory. Every death. Every sacrifice. Every moment that had defined them. And then the creature attacked. Not physically. Psychically. The world vanished. Steve opened his eyes. He was standing in a familiar place. A battlefield. Snow falling. Gunfire in the distance. A young Bucky Barnes stood beside him. Steve froze. "Buck." Bucky smiled. "Come on, Steve." Steve stepped forward. "I thought you were." Bucky laughed. "Dead." Steve's eyes filled with tears. "You are." Bucky's expression changed. "Then why are you still carrying me?" Steve couldn't answer. Bucky stepped closer. "You spend your whole life carrying everyone." Steve looked down. The shield felt impossibly heavy. "You don't have to anymore." Steve shook his head. "That's not true." Bucky smiled. "Then prove it." The battlefield disappeared. Steve found himself standing in front of Tony Stark. Tony wore the old Iron Man armor. No damage. No blood. Just Tony. Steve stared. "You've got to be kidding me." Tony smiled. "You always did hate surprises." Steve's eyes filled with tears. "You're not real." Tony nodded. "No." Steve looked away. "Then why does this hurt?" Tony stepped closer. "Because you love me." Steve whispered. "I should have said it more." Tony smiled. "You said it." "When?" "Every time you trusted me." Steve looked at him. Tony touched the shield. "You don't need to remember me forever, Steve." Steve's voice broke. "I don't want to forget you." Tony smiled. "You won't." The world shattered. Steve fell through darkness. Around him were thousands of memories. Natasha, Thor, Loki, Wanda, Vision, Peter, May, Chala, all the people the Avengers had lost. The creature whispered, "Choose." Steve looked around. "Choose what?" "One memory." The voices faded. "Keep one." The others began disappearing. "Or lose them all." Steve closed his eyes. The creature expected fear. It expected desperation. Instead, Steve smiled. "No." The darkness stopped. "I don't choose." The creature's voice became louder. "Then they all disappear." Steve opened his eyes. "Maybe." The darkness trembled. "But that doesn't mean they never mattered." The creature screamed. Steve continued. "You think memory is what makes someone important." He looked around. "You're wrong." The darkness cracked. "What makes someone important is what they changed." Tony appeared. Then Natasha. Then Bucky. Then everyone. Steve continued. "You can't erase that." The memories began glowing, because they weren't being held by one person anymore. They were held by everyone. Tony's sacrifice lived in Peter. Natasha's courage lived in Clint. Chala's wisdom lived in Shuri. Steve's shield lived in Sam. Every generation had inherited something. The creature suddenly understood. It had been fighting the wrong enemy. The Avengers didn't preserve memories. They preserved legacies. The creature screamed. The psychic world collapsed. Every Avenger woke simultaneously. The ancient creature beneath Earth roared. Strange looked around. We heard it. Thor smiled. Then let us finish it. But Strange shook his head. No. Thor frowned. Why? Strange pointed toward the sky. The last memory had returned, but now it was changing. Its body was splitting apart. Inside it were millions of glowing fragments. Each one represented a universe. The last memory whispered, "You have misunderstood again." Steve stepped forward. What now? The last memory looked almost human. You defeated my purpose. Steve raised his shield. Then leave. The creature smiled. I cannot. Why? Because I am not the enemy. Everyone froze. Strange stared. What? The last memory looked toward the abyss. I was created to warn you. Steve's expression changed. Warn us about what? The last memory pointed downward, the thing beneath reality. The ancient creature began rising. The last memory's voice became desperate. I was built from the memories of worlds it destroyed. Strange whispered, then you've been running from it. Yes, and you manipulated us into awakening it. I had no choice. Steve stepped closer. You always have a choice. The last memory shook its head. Not when you're the last thing left alive. The creature beneath Earth began emerging. Its body was larger than the planet. Stars formed around its limbs. Galaxies moved through its chest. Its face had no mouth, only eyes, and those eyes looked at every Avengers team. Then it spoke. I remember you. Steve stared. The creature continued. Every universe. Thor raised his weapon. Then remember this. Lightning exploded across the sky. Every Avengers team attacked simultaneously. This time, the creature didn't absorb their power. It fought back. The battlefield became chaos. Hulk struck its leg. Thor attacked its chest. Carol flew through its eyes. Wanda warped reality around its arms. Strange opened portals. The X-Men attacked its mind. The Guardians attacked from orbit. Spider-Man moved between collapsing buildings. Sam carried civilians through the chaos. Shuri unleashed Wakandan technology. For several minutes, the Avengers actually pushed it back. Steve looked around. Keep going. The creature stumbled. The heroes cheered. Then it smiled. Steve froze. Why is it smiling? Strange looked at the creature. His face went pale. Because the creature opened its hand. Inside was a tiny glowing object. A planet. Earth. Steve stared. No. The creature closed its fingers. The planet vanished. Not exploded. Not destroyed. Erased. Every person on that Earth disappeared. Every memory. Every timeline. Everything. Steve's shield slipped from his hand. The creature spoke. That was one. Strange looked horrified. How many? The creature opened its other hand. Thousands of planets appeared. Then millions. How many must I erase? Its eyes turned toward the Avengers. Before you understand? The Avengers stopped attacking. The creature continued. I am not trying to destroy your universe. Steve looked at it. Then what do you want? The creature answered. To stop the multiverse from collapsing. Strange stepped forward. Why would destroying worlds prevent that? The creature looked toward him. Because every universe you save creates another. Strange froze. The creature continued. You call yourselves heroes because you refuse to accept death. It pointed toward the Avengers. Every time you reverse it, a planet disappeared. Every time you restore a timeline, another vanished. Every time you refuse to let someone go, another universe cracked. The Avengers stood in silence. Peter looked at Strange. Is that true? Strange didn't answer, because he knew, somewhere deep inside, it was. The creature looked at Steve. You have 1 hour. The countdown appeared again. 1 hour. Steve stared. 1 hour for what? The creature answered. Decide. Decide what? The creature's eyes glowed. Whether you will save your universe. A pause. or save the multiverse. The countdown began. 59:59, 58:58, 57:57. And for the first time in Avengers history, Steve Rogers had no idea what the right choice was. Sam stood beside him. Steve. Steve looked at him. What? Sam nodded toward the heroes. Whatever happens. Steve looked around. Thousands of Avengers were watching him, waiting, trusting. Steve slowly picked up the shield. Then he looked toward the creature. You're asking the wrong man. The creature paused. Steve raised the shield. Because Avengers don't decide who gets to live. Thor stepped forward. Carol followed. Peter, Wanda, Strange, every hero. Steve's voice echoed across the battlefield. We find a way for everyone. The creature's eyes widened. And somewhere beyond reality, something else began to laugh. Because there was one final truth the Avengers had not discovered. The ancient creature beneath them was not alone. Something was standing behind it. Something that had been watching the entire war. Something even the creature feared. And as the countdown reached 49:59, a voice whispered across every universe. Let them try. The last memory looked upward, its face filled with terror. He's awake. Strange turned. Who? The last memory whispered one final name. Avengers. The stars went black. Meet your real enemy. What if the Avengers discovered that the creature they had spent the entire war fighting was actually protecting reality from something so powerful that even the multiverse itself had tried to forget its name? The stars disappeared, not one by one, all at once. For a moment, there was no sky above Earth, no moon, no sun, no galaxies, only darkness, absolute darkness. Steve Rogers looked upward. What happened? Doctor Strange didn't answer. He couldn't, because for the first time since becoming Sorcerer Supreme, Strange couldn't see beyond the darkness. His magic simply stopped. Every spell he tried collapsed before it formed. Wanda raised her hands. Nothing happened. Thor called for lightning. Silence. Carol released a burst of cosmic energy. The light vanished before it traveled 10 feet. Even the Infinity Stones carried by alternate Avengers flickered and went dark. Peter looked around. So, he swallowed. Does anyone have a plan? Deadpool slowly raised his hand. I have several. Sam looked at him. Are any of them useful? No. Then put your hand down. Deadpool lowered it. Fair. A sound came from the darkness. One heartbeat. Boom. The entire planet shook. Another. Boom. Every hero felt it. Then another. Boom. And something enormous moved beyond the edge of reality. The ancient creature beneath Earth raised its head. For the first time, it wasn't attacking. It was afraid. The last memory floated beside it. Its voice trembled. I told you. Strange looked at it. Told us what? The last memory pointed into the darkness. That it was awake. Steve stepped forward. Who is it? The last memory hesitated. Then it spoke a name that made every cosmic being across the multiverse turn away. The No. Strange's face changed. That's impossible. The last memory looked at him. Why? Because the No isn't a being. Strange's voice became quieter. It's an absence. The ancient creature spoke. Not anymore. Suddenly, a line appeared across the darkness. A thin white line. It looked like a crack. Then it widened. Behind it was not another universe. Not another dimension. Not space. Nothing. A place where existence had never happened. The crack opened, and something stepped through. It had no armor, no weapons, no recognizable face. It looked like a human silhouette carved from empty space. Where its eyes should have been, there were 2 points of absolute white. It looked at the Avengers, and every hero felt something leave them. Peter forgot Uncle Ben's face. Clint forgot Natasha's voice. Thor forgot the sound of Loki's laughter. Steve forgot the exact feeling of holding his mother's hand. For one terrible second, they forgot. Then Steve shouted, No! The memories returned, but the damage had been done. Strange looked horrified. It's feeding on memory. The last memory shook its head. No. It looked at the no. It's feeding on meaning. The no raised one hand. The battlefield changed. The Avengers suddenly stood in different places, different times, different lives. Peter found himself in a world where Uncle Ben had never died. Tony was alive. Peter had never become Spider-Man. He was happy, normal. He had friends, a future. He stared at his reflection. No mask, no scars, no burden. Then Tony walked into the room. Peter. Peter turned. Mr. Stark? Tony smiled. Come on. Peter stared at him. Where? Home. Peter followed. For a moment, he forgot the war. He forgot the Avengers. He forgot everything. Then he noticed something. Tony didn't cast a shadow. Peter stopped. You're not real. Tony's smile disappeared. The room cracked. The no appeared behind him. Peter stepped backward. The no whispered. Neither is your pain. Peter clenched his fists. My pain is part of me. The no tilted its head. Why? Because I survived it. The illusion shattered. Peter returned to the battlefield. Across the planet, other Avengers were fighting similar battles. Steve found himself in the 1940s. Peggy was waiting for him. No war. No super soldier serum. No frozen decades. Just a normal life. She looked at him. You can stay. Steve stared. How? Forget. He looked around. A small house. A quiet street. Children playing. No shield. No Avengers. No wars. Steve smiled sadly. I've spent my whole life thinking about the life I never got. Peggy touched his hand. And now you can have it. Steve closed his eyes. Then he opened them. I don't want it. Peggy looked surprised. Why? Because it isn't mine. The illusion shattered. Steve returned. Sam found himself in another world. One where Steve had never retired. One where Sam had never become Captain America. One where he was simply Falcon. Flying. Free. No responsibility. No expectations. Then Steve appeared. You don't have to carry my legacy. Sam smiled. I know. Then why do you? Sam looked toward the horizon. Because someone has to carry something forward. The illusion broke. Thor found Asgard, not destroyed, not rebuilt. Perfect. Odin alive. Frigga alive. Loki beside him. Thor's heart broke. Loki smiled. You could stay. Thor looked at his brother. I know. Then stay. Thor looked toward the sky. No. Loki frowned. Why? Because I've learned something. What? Thor smiled. Home isn't a place. He raised Stormbreaker. It's the people you refuse to abandon. The illusion shattered. Across the battlefield, every Avenger began breaking free. The no watched. For the first time, it looked confused. Strange realized why. It's never fought people like us. Wanda looked at him. What do you mean? Strange stared at the no. It understands desire. He looked at the Avengers. It understands fear. It understands regret. But it doesn't understand sacrifice. The last memory turned toward Strange. Exactly. Strange looked at the heroes. And that's why we can beat it. The Avengers regrouped. Steve stepped forward. Everyone listen. Thousands of heroes turned. The enemy is trying to give us everything we've lost. Peter raised his hand. That's actually a pretty tempting strategy. Steve smiled. I know. Then his expression became serious. But that's the trap. He looked around. We don't fight because we have nothing to lose. He raised a shield. We fight because we have something worth protecting. The Avengers raised their weapons. Thor, Carol, Wanda, Hulk, Sam, Peter, Black Panther, Shang-Chi, the X-Men, the Guardians, every generation, every legacy. The no raised its hand. The universe cracked. Then the Avengers charged. The first wave was overwhelming. Thor and Carol attacked together. Wanda tore open reality around the no. Strange trapped it inside a dimensional loop. The X-Men attacked its consciousness. Hulk slammed into it with enough force to fracture the battlefield. Peter moved through the chaos. Sam flew above them. Black Panther led the ground forces. The Guardians attacked from orbit. For the first time, the Null was forced backward. Steve saw it. It's working. Then the Null smiled. Steve froze. Why is it smiling? The Null opened its hand. Inside was something tiny. A glowing red stone. Strange stared. No. Steve looked at him. What? Strange's voice trembled. That's the Nexus. Carol flew closer. What does it do? Strange looked toward the Null. It connects every universe. Thor's expression hardened. Then destroy it. Strange shook his head. That's impossible. Why? Because if it breaks. Strange looked at the heroes. Every universe collapses into one. Steve understood. The Null wasn't trying to destroy the multiverse. It wanted to merge it. Every universe. Every timeline. Every version of every hero. Every possibility. One reality. One history. One existence. And one ruler. Peter looked toward the Null. Who gets to decide what survives? The Null answered. I do. The Nexus began glowing. Across the multiverse, reality started folding inward. 2 Earths became one. Then another. Heroes began seeing alternate versions of themselves appearing beside them. Steve saw dozens of Steves. Peter saw hundreds of Peters. Thor saw thousands of Thors. Tony appeared again. Natasha, Wanda, Vision, everyone. Every possibility was being dragged into one existence. The battlefield became chaos. Peter grabbed Sam. What's happening? Sam stared at the sky. We're becoming one universe. Strange shouted. Everyone get away from the Nexus. Too late. The Nexus exploded. A wave of white light consumed everything. Steve felt himself falling. He reached for Sam. Sam reached for him. Their hands almost touched. Then the universe disappeared. Silence. Steve opened his eyes. He was standing in New York. But something was wrong. The buildings were different. The sky was different. The people were different. He looked down. He wasn't wearing his uniform. He was wearing a simple jacket. He heard a familiar voice. Steve. He turned. Tony Stark stood there, alive. Steve's heart stopped. Tony smiled. Why are you looking at me like that? Steve couldn't speak. Tony laughed. Come on. Steve looked around. No Avengers tower. No aliens. No war. No destruction. Everything was normal. Too normal. Then Tony asked, where are the others? Steve frowned. What others? Tony's smile disappeared. The Avengers. Steve looked at him. What Avengers? Tony stared. For the first time, Steve understood. The Null had succeeded. The multiverse had merged. There was only one reality now. One timeline. One history. And in this reality, the Avengers had never existed. Steve turned toward the street. Thousands of people walked past him. Nobody recognized him. Nobody knew Tony. Nobody knew Thor. Nobody knew Natasha. Nobody knew Peter Parker. Nobody knew any of them. Steve's breathing became heavy. Then Tony grabbed his shoulder. Steve. Steve looked at him. Tony whispered, something's wrong. Steve nodded. Yeah. Tony looked toward the sky. Because I remember. Steve froze. Tony's eyes filled with fear. I remember everything. Then another voice came from behind them. Me too. They turned. Peter Parker stood in the street. Then Sam. Then Thor. Then Carol. Then Wanda. Then Strange. One by one, the Avengers appeared. Every team. Every generation. They remembered, but the rest of the world didn't. Steve looked toward Strange. What happened? Strange stared at his hands. The Null merged every universe. Steve frowned. So why do we remember? Strange looked around. Because we're Avengers. Tony stepped closer. That's not an answer. Strange shook his head. It is. He looked at Steve. We've died too many times. Steve stared. What? Strange continued. We've crossed too many timelines. Broken too many realities. Changed too many futures. We became something the universe couldn't erase. Thor raised Stormbreaker. Then we are victorious. Strange looked toward the horizon. No. Thor frowned. Why? Strange pointed. The sky was turning black. The null appeared above the city. But now it had a body, a face, a crown, and thousands of realities were moving inside its eyes. The null spoke. You remember? Steve stepped forward. Yes. Good. Steve tightened his fists. Because we're coming for you. The null smiled. No. It looked toward the city. You misunderstand. A pause. I am not your enemy anymore. Strange's eyes widened. Then what are you? The null looked at them. I am your world. Everyone froze. The null spread its arms. This reality is me. Steve looked around. Every building, every person, every memory, every life, all of it connected to the null. Strange whispered, if we destroy it. Tony finished the sentence. We destroy everything. The null smiled. Exactly. The Avengers stood frozen. They had spent their entire lives fighting enemies they could punch, enemies they could outsmart, enemies they could imprison. But now, the enemy was reality itself. Steve looked at Tony. Tony looked back. What do we do? Steve stared at the null. Then something clicked. A memory. Tony's message. Don't fight it separately. Steve looked around. Every Avengers team was still there. Every hero, every generation, every legacy. And suddenly he understood what Tony had meant. The Avengers didn't need to destroy the world. They needed to give the world something the null couldn't control. Choice. Steve stepped forward. We don't destroy the reality. The null smiled. Then you surrender. Steve shook his head. No. He raised a shield. We change it. The null smile disappeared. Steve looked at every Avenger, every team. Sam stepped beside him. Every generation. Thor raised Stormbreaker. Every universe. Carol ignited. Every hero. Peter pulled down his mask. Steve looked toward the null. And every choice. The Avengers assembled, not behind one leader, not behind one team, behind one idea. The world belonged to everyone. And for the first time, the null looked afraid, because the Avengers had finally discovered the one thing it couldn't erase. Not memory, not power, not even hope, free will. Then the sky cracked, and from beyond the merged universe, something else stepped through, something wearing Tony Stark's face, something carrying Steve Rogers' shield, something with Thor's hammer in one hand, and the Infinity Stones in the other. Peter stared. Sam looked at him. What? Peter pointed. That's us. The alternate figure smiled. No. Its eyes turned black. What happens? The figure raised a shield. When you lose. And the greatest war in Marvel entered its final stage. What if the Avengers were forced to fight the darkest possible version of themselves, and discovered that this enemy knew every weakness because it was created from every time the Avengers had failed? The figure stepped through the crack in reality. For a moment, nobody spoke, because there was something deeply wrong about looking at yourself and knowing that the thing standing across from you had already lived through your worst possible ending. It wore Tony Stark's face. Steve Rogers' shield rested against his shoulder. Thor's hammer floated beside it. Captain Marvel's energy burned beneath its skin, and behind it stood an army. Not aliens, not demons, not monsters. Avengers, thousands of them, every variation, every broken possibility, every version that had chosen power over responsibility, every hero who had become a tyrant, every leader who had abandoned their team, every Avenger who had lost faith. The Null's army. The Avengers stared. Peter whispered, "Those are us." Tony shook his head. No. He looked at the army. They're what happens when we stop being us. The alternate Steve stepped forward. You still don't understand. Steve raised a shield, then explained. The alternate Steve smiled. We did. A pause. We tried everything you are about to try. He pointed toward the merged world. We trusted each other. We united. We sacrificed. We saved people. We refused to choose between universes. His expression became colder. And we lost. Steve stared at him. Then why are you here? To save you from making the same mistake. Tony stepped forward. By destroying everything? The alternate Tony looked at him. By ending the cycle. Tony's expression hardened. You don't get to decide that. The alternate Tony smiled. I already did. He raised one hand. The battlefield exploded. Avengers fought Avengers. Thor collided with a darker Thor. Lightning filled the sky. Hulk slammed into an alternate Hulk. Spider-Man swung between buildings while 3 corrupted Spider-Men chased him. Sam fought a Captain America who wore black armor. Carol battled a version of herself surrounded by red cosmic energy. Wanda faced another Wanda. Strange faced Strange. And Steve faced Steve. Their shields collided. The impact shattered the street beneath them. The alternate Steve moved faster. Steve blocked, countered, blocked again. You fight exactly like me. The alternate Steve smiled. I fight better. Steve struck. The alternate Steve caught his wrist because I stopped holding back. He threw Steve through a building. Steve crashed through concrete. He stood slowly. Blood ran from his forehead. The alternate Steve approached. You think compassion makes you strong. Steve raised his shield. It does. No. The alternate Steve raised his own. It makes you predictable. They charged. Their shields collided again. Steve was pushed backward. The alternate Steve continued. You refuse to sacrifice one person. Steve blocked. You refuse to destroy one universe. Another strike. You refuse to kill the enemy. Another. You refuse to become what you fight. Steve finally caught the shield. That's the difference. The alternate Steve stared. Steve pulled him closer. I don't need to become you to win. Then Steve headbutted him. The alternate Steve stumbled. Steve grabbed the shield and threw him across the street. But another alternate Avengers appeared. Steve looked around. Hundreds. Thousands. He realized something. This isn't a fight we can win by numbers. Tony heard him through the comms. Already figured that out. Steve looked toward him. Tony's armor was damaged. We're getting overwhelmed. Thor landed beside them. I have fought armies before. Tony shook his head. Not armies that know every move we make. Strange appeared. And that's exactly what we need to change. Steve looked at him. How? Strange looked toward the no. We stopped fighting like Avengers. Tony frowned. That's a terrible sentence. Strange continued. We've always had teams. He looked around. Different Avengers. Different strategies. Different histories. The alternate army knew every individual hero. Every formation. Every combination. Every attack. So we do something they've never seen. Steve understood. We become unpredictable. Strange smiled. Exactly. Steve raised his shield. All teams break formation. Sam shouted. You heard him. The battlefield transformed. Heroes stopped following established patterns. Thor didn't fight alongside his guardians. Carol didn't stay in the air. Peter stopped using conventional webs. Hulk stopped charging. Wanda stopped attacking directly. Strange opened portals randomly. The Guardians entered the fight from unexpected directions. The X-Men created impossible psychic combinations. Young Avengers worked with old Avengers. Heroes who had never fought together began improvising. The alternate armies struggled. For the first time, they couldn't predict what was coming. Peter swung through a portal created by Strange. He emerged behind an alternate Iron Man. Hey! Tony's voice came through his communicator. Peter, what? That was my move. Peter grinned. Not anymore. He kicked the alternate Iron Man through another portal. Thor threw Stormbreaker toward Captain Marvel. Carol caught it. She flew forward. Thor shouted, Return. Carol threw it back. Thor caught it. Lightning exploded. The attack destroyed an entire line of alternate Avengers. Sam watched. Okay. He smiled. This is working. Then the Null spoke. Enough. Everything stopped. Every Avenger froze. The Null raised its hand. Time stopped. Not slowed. Stopped. Steve couldn't move. Peter couldn't breathe. Thor couldn't blink. The entire world became frozen. Only the No moved. It walked through the battlefield, past the heroes, past the broken buildings, past the alternate Avengers. It stopped in front of Steve. You believe unpredictability can defeat me? Steve's eyes moved. The No leaned closer. I created unpredictability. Steve couldn't speak. The No continued. I have watched every possibility. It touched Steve's shield. I know every choice you can make. Then something happened. Steve moved. Barely. The No stepped backward. Impossible. You. Steve pushed against the frozen time. His muscles shook. He forced his hand upward. Wrong. The No stared. Steve moved another inch. You can know. Another. What we might do. The shield began glowing. But you can't know? Steve finally moved. What we'll choose. Time exploded back into motion. The No was thrown backward. The Avengers stared. Strange smiled. Free will. Steve nodded. Exactly. The No roared. The alternate Avengers attacked again. But this time, the heroes didn't fight them. They spoke. Peter approached an alternate Peter. You don't have to do this. The corrupted Spider-Man laughed. You're weak. Peter shook his head. No. He removed his mask. I'm scared. The alternate Peter stopped. Peter continued. I've always been scared. He looked at him. But I keep going anyway. The alternate Peter's expression changed. For a second, he looked human. Then his body began dissolving. The No screamed. No. One by one, the alternate Avengers began disappearing. Not because they were defeated. Because they were forgiven. Steve lowered his shield. You're not our enemies. The alternate Steve stared at him. Then what are we? Steve answered. Our warnings. The alternate Steve's eyes filled with tears. Then he vanished. Tony looked at the alternate version of himself. The dark Tony stared back. You think this changes anything? Tony nodded. Maybe. The alternate Tony smiled. You always were an optimist. Tony stepped closer. And you always needed someone to believe in you. The alternate Tony vanished. Across the battlefield, the alternate Avengers disappeared. The No became unstable. No! Its voice shook the universe. You cannot erase me. Strange looked at it. We're not. The No screamed. Then what are you doing? Steve answered. Remembering you. The No froze. Steve continued. Every mistake. Every failure. Every version of ourselves that fell. We won't erase them. We'll learn from them. The No's body began cracking. The merged universe trembled. The ancient creature appeared behind it. The last memory appeared beside Strange. Everyone stared. The last memory whispered, You're doing what I could never do. Strange looked at it. What? You're remembering without being controlled by memory. The No began collapsing, but then it smiled. Steve saw it. What? The No whispered. Too late. The universe cracked. Tony looked around. What did it do? Strange suddenly understood. It separated the worlds. Steve frowned. That's good. No. Strange looked terrified. It's separating them too quickly. The merged universe began splitting. Every universe was returning, but the process was unstable. Worlds collided. Timelines shattered. Heroes began disappearing. Peter reached for Sam. Sam! Sam grabbed him. Thor reached for Carol. Wanda grabbed Strange. Steve reached toward Tony. Tony! Tony grabbed Steve's arm. The universe pulled them apart. Tony shouted, Steve! Steve held tighter. Don't let go! Tony smiled. I've heard that before. The crack widened. Steve's fingers slipped. Tony fell. Tony! Steve reached. Too late. Tony disappeared into another universe. Steve screamed. Then Sam vanished. Thor, Peter, Carol, Wanda, Strange, everyone. The Avengers were scattered across the multiverse. Steve opened his eyes. He was alone. The battlefield was gone. The No was gone. The ancient creature was gone. Every hero was gone. Steve stood in an empty New York. The sky was blue. People walked normally. No one knew what had happened. Steve looked at his shield. A crack ran through it. He whispered, "Tony." No answer. Then his communicator activated. Static. Steve pressed it. "Hello." A voice came through. "Peter. Captain?" Steve froze. "Peter?" "Yeah." Steve smiled. "Where are you?" Peter's voice trembled. "I don't know." Another voice appeared. "Sam." "Steve." Steve laughed. "Sam." Then Thor. "Friends." "Carol." "I'm here." "Strange. And I know where we are." Steve looked upward. "Where?" Strange's voice became serious. "Different universes." Steve frowned. "How many?" Strange paused. "All of them." Steve looked around. The realization hit him. The Avengers had succeeded. The multiverse survived. But they were scattered across millions of realities. And the Null was still alive. Weak. Broken. But alive. Then Strange said, "Steve." "What?" "I found something." "What?" Silence. Then Strange spoke. The Null wasn't the one controlling the multiverse. Steve's expression changed. "Then who was?" Strange answered, "The last memory." Steve stared. "That's impossible." "I thought so too." Strange's voice lowered. "But I've traced energy." "To where?" A pause. "To the first universe." Steve's eyes widened. "The first universe?" Strange continued. "The place where everything began." Steve looked toward the sky. "What does it want?" Strange answered, "Us." The communicator went silent. Then a new voice came through. "Tony." Steve froze. "Tony." Tony's voice was weak. "Hey, Cap." Steve smiled. "Where are you?" Tony paused. "That's the problem." "What?" "I don't think I'm in a universe." Steve's smile disappeared. "Then where are you?" Tony whispered, "I'm somewhere before the universe." The communicator crackled. Then Tony's voice became distant. "Steve." "What?" "There's something here." Steve tightened his grip. "What?" Tony whispered, "It knows your name." The transmission died. Steve stared at the communicator. Then the sky above him turned black. A single message appeared. "Come to the beginning." Steve looked at the message, then smiled, because the Avengers had spent their entire lives assembling when the world was ending. Now they had to assemble before the world had ever begun. Steve raised a shield. "Avengers!" Across millions of universes, heroes heard his voice. "Assemble!" And one by one, the lights of the multiverse began turning on. What if the Avengers discovered that the first universe wasn't the beginning of creation at all, but a prison built to contain something even the gods were terrified to remember? The first light appeared beyond reality. Then another. Then another. Across millions of universes, Avengers heard the same command. "Avengers!" Steve Rogers' voice echoed through dimensions. "Assemble!" And they did. Not through portals. Not through ships. Not through technology. Through memory. Every Avenger who still remembered the war felt the call. Peter Parker heard it while standing on a rooftop in a universe where New York had never been attacked. Thor heard it on an Asgard that had never fallen. Carol heard it while flying between galaxies. Sam heard it inside a world where Steve Rogers had never passed him the shield. Wanda heard it in a reality where she had never become Scarlet Witch. And Tony Stark. Tony heard it somewhere that wasn't a universe at all. He was floating in absolute darkness. No stars. No planets. No time. His armor was gone. His body felt weightless. Then a voice spoke. "You shouldn't be here." Tony looked around. "Trust me." He smiled. "I've heard that before." A figure appeared. It was the last memory. But it looked different now. Older. Tired. Almost human. Tony stared. "You've got some explaining to do." The last memory smiled faintly. "I know. You manipulated the Avengers." "Yes." "You brought us here." "Yes." "You caused half the disasters we've been dealing with." "Yes." Tony frowned. "You know, when someone admits everything that quickly, I start getting suspicious." The last memory looked beyond him. Tony Stark. Tony's expression became serious. How do you know my name? I know every name. Every person? Every person who was ever remembered. Tony stepped closer. And the ones who weren't, the last memory looked down. Those are why I exist. Tony stared. So, what is this place? The beginning. Tony looked around. Doesn't look very impressive. This is before existence. Tony paused. That's significantly less impressive. The last memory almost smiled. Then the darkness moved. Tony stopped joking. What was that? The last memory looked terrified. Don't look. Tony turned anyway. A shape appeared in the darkness. Not a creature. Not a person. A memory. Tony saw countless realities. Every Avengers team. Every victory. Every defeat. Every universe. All of them connected to a single point. At the center was a small child. Tony stared. Who is that? The last memory whispered. The first. The child looked toward them. Tony felt something strange. He knew that face. Not personally, but instinctively. It was a face of innocence. Before power. Before gods. Before heroes. Before villains. Before fear. The first looked at Tony and smiled. Then Tony heard Steve's voice. Tony. Tony turned. A portal opened. Steve stepped through. Behind him came Sam. Thor. Carol. Peter. Strange. Wanda. Thousands of Avengers followed. Tony smiled. About time. Peter ran toward him. Mr. Stark. Tony caught him. Kid. Peter hugged him. I thought you were gone. Tony looked at Steve. So did I. Steve stepped closer. Are you okay? Tony nodded. Mostly. Peter looked at the darkness. What's that? Tony's smile faded. That's the problem. The last memory turned. The first has awakened. Strange approached. What is it? The last memory answered. The first consciousness. Strange frowned. Before the multiverse? Before time. Before space. Before matter. Strange looked at the child. Then what is it? The last memory whispered. Choice. Everyone went silent. The first thought ever made. The child stood. The darkness moved with it. The universe began when it made a decision. Steve asked, what decision? The last memory looked at him. To exist. The first smiled. And now? Its voice was impossibly gentle. It wants to make another. Steve stepped forward. What decision? The first looked directly at him. Whether existence should continue. Silence. Thor raised Stormbreaker. You threaten creation itself? The first looked at him. I created it. Thor hesitated. The first continued. You call yourselves Avengers. It looked across the assembled heroes. But what have you actually protected? Steve answered. People. The first smiled. People who create war. People who destroy worlds. People who resurrect the dead. People who alter reality. People who refuse to accept consequences. Its eyes turned toward Strange. You call yourselves heroes. Strange stepped forward. We make mistakes. The first nodded. Exactly. It raised one hand. The Avengers saw their history. Every disaster. Every city destroyed. Every innocent life lost. Every universe damaged by their choices. Sokovia. New York. Titan. Westview. The Blip. Every alternate reality. Every catastrophe. Every consequence. The first showed them all. Peter lowered his head. Tony stared at the images. Steve remained silent. The first asked, why should I allow existence to continue? Its voice echoed. When existence continuously proves it cannot be trusted, Steve finally spoke. Because we can change. The first looked at him. You have had billions of chances. Steve nodded. And we'll need billions more. The first seemed surprised. Steve stepped forward. We're not perfect. He looked at the Avengers. We never were. He raised his shield. But that's why we fight. The first tilted its head. Why? Because being imperfect doesn't mean giving up. The first stared. Steve continued. Every time we fail. He looked at Tony. Someone learns. At Sam. Someone carries the lesson. At Peter. Someone grows. At Wanda, someone finds another path. At Thor, someone becomes better. At every Avenger, that's what existence is. The first remained silent. Then it smiled. Prove it. The darkness exploded. Every Avenger was separated. Again, but this time, they weren't sent to different universes. They were sent into different moments of their own lives. Steve returned to the battlefield, where he first became Captain America. Tony returned to the cave. Thor returned to the moment he was banished. Peter returned the night Uncle Ben died. Wanda returned to Sokovia. Sam returned to the day he first met Steve. Carol returned to the moment she gained her powers. Each hero faced one question. Would you change it? Tony stared the cave. He could prevent his captivity. He could save himself. He could avoid becoming Iron Man. But then, he remembered everyone he had saved. He shook his head. No. Steve saw the past. He could choose not to take the serum. He could live a normal life. He shook his head. No. Peter saw Uncle Ben. He could stop the thief. He could save him. His hand trembled. Then Peter whispered, I can't change what happened. The first appeared beside him. Why? Peter looked at Ben. Because that pain made me responsible. The first frowned. Peter continued, if I erase it, he looked toward his uncle. I erased the person I became because of it. The first disappeared. Wanda stood in Sokovia. She saw her parents, her brother, her childhood. She could change everything. But she didn't. She whispered, I can't undo the past. A tear rolled down her cheek. But I can choose what I do with it. Across reality, every Avenger made the same choice. Not to erase their mistakes. Not to pretend their pain never happened. To accept it. The first watched. And slowly, the darkness around it began shrinking. Strange realized what was happening. The first feeds on uncertainty. Tony looked at him. What? Strange explained. It exists because existence itself was a question. He looked toward the child. Every choice gives it form. Steve understood. Then our choices are weakening it. The first suddenly screamed. The scream shattered the beginning of time. The last memory appeared. Now! Every Avenger attacked. Not with weapons. With memories. Steve's shield became a symbol of sacrifice. Tony's armor became a symbol of responsibility. Thor's hammer became a symbol of redemption. Peter's webs became a symbol of perseverance. Wanda's magic became a symbol of choice. Sam's wings became a symbol of legacy. Carol's energy became a symbol of hope. Every hero transformed their history into power. The first began collapsing, but before it disappeared, it smiled. Steve froze. Why are you smiling? The first looked at him. Because you finally understand. Understand what? The first pointed behind Steve. He turned. The last memory was standing there, but it was changing. Its body was becoming transparent. Strange stared. What are you doing? The last memory smiled. Ending my existence. Tony stepped forward. Why? Because I was created from what was forgotten. It looked at the Avengers. And now nothing will be forgotten. Steve frowned. That doesn't mean you have to die. The last memory smiled. It does. It looked at Tony. Some things exist only until their purpose is complete. Tony's eyes filled with tears. You don't have to do this. The last memory looked at him. Neither did you. Tony froze. The last memory continued. And yet, it smiled. You did. Its body began dissolving. The last memory looked toward Steve. Tell them. Tell them what? Tell them that the Avengers didn't save the multiverse by being the strongest. It looked at every hero. They saved it by refusing to become gods. The last memory vanished. The first disappeared with it. And for a moment, everything was silent. Then the multiverse returned. One universe. Then another. Then millions. Every reality stabilized. Every timeline settled. The Avengers stood together in the beginning of time. Steve looked around. Is it over? Strange nodded. I think so. Tony looked at the others. That's usually when something terrible happens. Peter laughed. Don't say that. Tony smiled. Sorry, kid. Then the first spoke one final time. Not from the darkness. from everywhere. You have proven existence deserves another chance. Steve looked upward. The voice continued. But there's a price. The Avengers froze. Thor raised his weapon. What price? The first answered. Someone must remain. Steve stepped forward. I'll do it. Sam grabbed his arm. No. Steve looked at him. I've done this before. Sam shook his head. Not this time. Tony stepped forward. Actually, Steve looked at him. Tony smiled. I've got an idea. Steve frowned. Tony. Tony raised his hands. Relax. He looked at the beginning of existence, then at the Avengers. Maybe the price isn't a person. Strange's eyes widened. What are you thinking? Tony smiled. We don't leave someone behind. He looked at Steve. We leave something behind. Steve understood. A legacy, a memory, a message, something that could survive every universe. Tony removed the arc reactor from his chest. Peter's eyes widened. No. Tony held it up. This isn't a sacrifice. He looked at Steve. It's a seed. The arc reactor began glowing. Every Avenger placed something beside it. Steve's shield, Thor's hammer, Sam's wings, Carol's cosmic energy, Wanda's magic, Peter's web, Strange's spell, Black Panther's claw, Hulk's strength. Every hero contributed something. Not a weapon, a piece of themselves. The first watched, and the beginning of existence transformed. A new star appeared, then a planet, then life. The Avengers watched silently. A new reality was born, one without the scars of their wars, but with the lessons. Steve smiled. That's the future. Tony nodded. Yeah. Peter looked at the new universe. Will they remember us? Steve looked at him. Maybe. Tony smiled. They don't need to. Peter frowned. Why? Tony looked at the new stars. Because if we did our job... He smiled. They'll become something better. The Avengers began returning to their universes. One by one, Steve looked around. Every team, every generation, every hero. For the first time, they weren't united because the world was ending. They were united because the world was beginning again. Steve looked at Sam. You ready? Sam smiled. Always. Thor raised Stormbreaker. Carol flew upward. Peter swung into the light. Tony stepped beside Steve. One last thing. Steve looked at him. What? Tony smiled. Avengers? Steve nodded. Avengers? They stood together. And across the multiverse, the lights turned on. But as Steve stepped through the final portal, he heard one whisper. Not from the first. Not from the last memory. From somewhere beyond the new universe. A whisper that sounded almost like a warning. You won this war. Steve stopped. He turned. The portal was closing. The voice continued. But you have not met the one who started it. Steve's eyes widened. The portal vanished. Tony looked at him. What? Steve stared into the empty space. Nothing. But deep inside, Steve knew the war was over. The greatest Avengers war in history had ended. But someone had been watching from the beginning. Someone who had never attacked, never appeared, never spoken. Someone who had allowed every enemy to rise, every universe to fracture, every hero to suffer. And now that the Avengers had survived, that mysterious observer finally opened its eyes. What if the final enemy wasn't the being the Avengers had fought, but the one who had secretly created every enemy, every crisis, and every war just to discover whether heroes were truly worth saving? The first thing Steve Rogers noticed was the silence. Not peaceful silence. The kind that comes after an explosion. The kind that makes you wonder what hasn't happened yet. Steve stood alone on a rooftop overlooking New York. The city was alive. Cars moved through the streets. People laughed. Lights filled apartment windows. Somewhere below, a child chased a ball through a park. Everything looked normal. Too normal. Steve touched the communicator attached to his ear. Tony. Static. Sam. Nothing. Peter. Silence. Steve lowered his hand. For the first time since the greatest war in Marvel history had begun, he was alone. Then his communicator activated. A voice came through. Steve. He froze. Tony. Steve smiled. Tony. Yeah. Steve looked around. Where are you? A pause. Not where I should be. Steve's smile disappeared. What happened? I don't know. Tony sounded serious. 1 minute I was standing beside you. The next I was here. Where? I don't know. Steve frowned. Describe it. Tony hesitated. That's a problem. Steve waited. There isn't anything to describe. Steve's expression hardened. Nothing. Nothing. Tony's voice lowered. No space. No stars. No ground. Then how are you standing? I'm not. Steve froze. What? Tony whispered. I'm falling. The communicator erupted with static. Tony. No response. Steve looked toward the sky. A small black crack appeared above Manhattan. Then another. Then hundreds. The city lights flickered. Steve whispered. No. He knew that feeling. Reality was breaking again. But this time, there was no enemy army. No creature. No cosmic storm. Only cracks. Then a figure stepped through one. Steve raised his shield. The figure landed on the rooftop. It looked human. An old man. Gray hair. Simple clothes. No armor. No weapon. Steve kept the shield raised. Who are you? The old man smiled. You know me. Steve frowned. No. The old man tilted his head. You've seen me many times. Steve stared. Where? The man pointed toward the city. Everywhere. Steve looked. The old man continued. I was a scientist watching when you received the serum. Steve's eyes widened. You were there? I was a man in the crowd when Tony Stark first revealed the Iron Man suit. Steve tightened his grip. I was the soldier standing behind Thor when Asgard fell. Steve's expression changed. You. The old man smiled. I watched Peter Parker become Spider-Man. Steve stepped backward. That's impossible. The man nodded. Yes. Who are you? The old man finally answered. My name is Eternity's Witness. Steve stared. The Witness? The old man nodded. I have watched every universe. Every Avengers team. Every victory. Every failure. Every death. Steve lowered the shield slightly. Then why didn't you help? The Witness smiled sadly. Because I wasn't allowed to. By who? The Witness looked upward. By the one who created me. Steve's expression hardened. Who? The Witness didn't answer. Instead, the sky opened. Millions of images appeared. Every Avengers team. Every enemy. Every battle. Ultron. Loki. Thanos. Kong. Every version. Every timeline. Steve saw something disturbing. The enemies weren't random. They were connected. A hidden pattern ran through all of them. Every war pushed the Avengers closer together. Every crisis made them stronger. Every defeat forced them to evolve. Steve stared. Someone was testing us. The Witness nodded. Yes. Who? The Witness pointed toward the stars. Your greatest enemy. Steve's jaw tightened. Where is he? The Witness smiled. Closer than you think. The communicator activated again. Tony's voice. Steve. Steve turned. Tony, I found something. What? Tony's voice sounded distant. I think I know who created the Witness. Steve waited. Tony continued. Remember the message I recorded before my death? Steve nodded. The one about something underneath the universe. Yes. It wasn't about the last memory. Steve's expression changed. Then what was it? Tony answered. Something older. The rooftop shook. The Witness looked afraid. Steve noticed. You know. The Witness looked at him. I know what is coming. What? The Witness whispered. The Architect. Steve stared. Architect. The Witness nodded. The being that designed the multiverse. Steve's eyes narrowed. Why? To create heroes. Steve didn't understand. Why would anyone create heroes? The Witness smiled. To answer one question. What question? The Witness looked at the Avengers symbol on Steve's uniform. Can power choose compassion? Steve stared. The witness continued. The architect created universes, then introduced conflict, created gods, then created monsters, created heroes, then gave them reasons to fail. Steve shook his head. That's insane. Perhaps. The witness looked toward the city. But it worked. Steve looked at the sky. What does the architect want now? The witness answered, to end the experiment. Steve's eyes hardened. No. The witness nodded. Yes. Why? Because you passed. Steve frowned. Then shouldn't it leave us alone? The witness shook his head. That is the problem. Why? Because the architect never expected you to pass. Steve stared. The witness continued. It created heroes to study sacrifice. Instead, the heroes became something more. Steve looked around. Avengers. The witness nodded. Exactly. Suddenly, the sky cracked. A voice echoed. Enough. The witness fell to his knees. Steve raised his shield. A massive shadow appeared above the city. The same silhouette from the beginning, but now it was larger, older, more powerful. The architect. Its face remained hidden. Its voice shook reality. Steve Rogers. Steve stepped forward. You know my name. I know every name. Then you know we're not afraid. The architect laughed. You still believe fear is your weakness. Steve shook his head. No. He raised a shield. Fear is what tells us something matters. Silence. Then the architect spoke. You have learned. Steve nodded. We have. Then prove it. The architect raised one hand. Every Avengers team across the multiverse appeared. Sam, Peter, Thor, Carol, Wanda, Strange, Hulk, Black Panther, the Guardians, the X-Men, the Young Avengers, the Secret Avengers. Every hero, every universe, every generation. All of them were brought into one battlefield. The architect appeared above them. One final test. Steve looked around. What test? The architect answered. Save me. Steve froze. What? The architect continued. You have spent your lives defeating enemies. Its voice became quieter. Now save one. A human figure appeared inside the architect's chest. A child. The first. The Avengers stared. The architect had trapped the first inside itself. Steve understood. The first was never the enemy. No. The no, part of the test. The last memory, another. Steve's expression hardened. And you? The architect smiled. I am the final question. Steve stepped forward. What happens if we fail? The architect answered. You return to your universes. Steve frowned. That's it. No. The architect's voice became colder. You return without your powers. The heroes went silent. And your memories? Erased. Peter looked at Steve. Nobody remembers the Avengers? The architect nodded. You will become ordinary. Thor raised his hammer. And if we refuse? The architect answered. Then I erase every universe. Steve looked at the heroes. Every face. Every team. Every generation. He understood the trap. If they fought, they lost. If they surrendered, they lost. If they sacrificed themselves, they lost. The only way to win was to save the enemy. Steve lowered his shield. Tony's voice came through. Cap. Steve looked toward the architect. We're not fighting. The architect smiled. Good. Steve stepped forward. We're saving you. The architect stopped. For the first time, it looked surprised. The Avengers moved, not to attack, to rescue. Strange open portals around the architect. Wanda stabilized its collapsing mind. Thor absorbed cosmic energy. Carol carried fragments of the architect's broken consciousness. Peter reached the first. Hey! The child looked at him. Peter smiled. Come with us. The first reached out. Peter grabbed its hand. The architect screamed. Stop! Steve shouted. No! He raised a shield. We don't abandon anyone. The architect's body cracked. The witness watched. Tears filled his eyes. I've waited billions of years to see this. Steve looked at him. See what? The witness smiled. Heroes saving the villain. The architect collapsed. The first escaped. The darkness disappeared. And for the first time, the multiverse was completely silent. The architect lay on the battlefield. Weak. Human. Steve approached. The architect looked up. Why? Steve frowned. Why what? Why save me? Steve smiled. Because that's what heroes do. The architect shook its head. You should hate me. Steve nodded. Maybe. Then why? Steve looked toward the Avengers. Because if we only save people we like. He raised a shield. We're not heroes. The architect's eyes filled with tears. For the first time since creation, the being that had watched countless civilizations rise and fall, cried. The multiverse stabilized. The broken realities healed. The dead timelines returned to rest. The Avengers began disappearing into their own worlds. Steve looked around. Is it over? Strange smiled. Yes. Peter smiled. Actually over? Strange nodded. Actually over. Thor laughed. Then let us celebrate. Tony appeared beside Steve. Steve smiled. You're really alive. Tony grinned. Unfortunately. Peter laughed. Sam shook his head. Some things never change. Carol smiled. Wanda looked toward the stars. And Steve realized something. Every Avengers team had come together. Not because they were the strongest. Not because they were perfect. Not because they had the best weapons. They had won because every generation had inherited something from the one before it. Courage, sacrifice, responsibility, hope, and the willingness to stand together when standing together was hardest. Steve looked at Sam. You ready to take it from here? Sam smiled. I thought you were never going to ask. Steve handed him the shield. Not because Steve was abandoning the Avengers. Because he understood something now. The Avengers didn't belong to one man, one generation, or one universe. They belonged to everyone willing to stand up when the world needed them. Tony looked toward the horizon. So, Peter asked, what happens now? Tony smiled. Now. He looked at Steve. We go home. The heroes began walking away. Thor flew into the sky. Carol followed. Peter swung between buildings. Sam took flight. Wanda opened a portal. Strange stepped through. The Guardians disappeared into space. The X-Men returned to their world. One by one, the greatest collection of Avengers ever assembled began returning home. Steve remained behind for one moment. He looked at the battlefield, at the broken shield fragments, at the empty sky. He remembered everyone. Tony, Natasha, Chala, Vision, Loki, Peter's Uncle Ben, every hero, every sacrifice, every mistake, every victory. Then Steve smiled, because he finally understood the truth. The Avengers were never about winning every battle. They were never about being powerful enough to stop every disaster. They were never about preventing every death. The Avengers were about what happened after everything went wrong. When the world was broken, they rebuilt it. When hope disappeared, they carried it. When heroes fell, someone else stood up. Steve looked toward the rising sun and whispered, Avengers! Across the multiverse, millions of heroes heard him. Assemble! The words echoed, not as a command, as a promise. Then Steve walked away. The sun rose over Earth. And somewhere in a quiet city, a little boy found an old broken Avengers symbol lying on the sidewalk. He picked it up. His mother called to him. Come on. The boy looked at the symbol, then smiled. He put it in his pocket. He didn't know who the Avengers were. He didn't know what they had sacrificed. He didn't know how many universes they had saved. But one day, he would, because heroes don't truly disappear. They become stories. Stories become legends. Legends become inspiration. And inspiration becomes the next hero. The camera rises above Earth, above the moon, above the solar system, past galaxies, past dimensions, past the multiverse. And there, among countless stars, one tiny light shines brighter than the rest. The light becomes the shape of an Avengers symbol, and a final voice echoes through eternity. Whatever universe you are born into, a pause. Whatever darkness finds you, another pause. Whatever impossible enemy stands before you, the voice becomes stronger. Never forget, the Avengers are not powerful because they stand together. They stand together because they believe no one should have to face the darkness alone. The light fills the screen. The music rises, and the final words appear across the endless universe. Every hero falls. Every hero rises. But when they all stand together, not even the end of everything can make them fall. The screen fades to black. Silence. Then one final sound. A shield hitting the ground. Cut to black. The greatest Avengers war is over, but the legacy has only begun.